always hold up this thing and say, I know that out of 8 billion or so people, I'm the only one with this. And I want to be treated that way. Welcome to Entrepreneurs, the Playbook. I'm David Meltzer, here with an incredible entrepreneur. Being of service is my mission, to empower over 1 billion people to be happy. And this CEO, Bill Reed, at Herman Science, is on the same mission, although he may be more qualified with the skills, knowledge, and desire that he has as a former U.S. Navy diver. He's a best-selling author and New York Times best-selling author. So stop buying the bullshit about Amazon. This is a real author, a real entrepreneur. I'm blessed to have the incredible Bill Reed here on the Playbook. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, David. Great to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you. And thank you, first of all, for your service, which today I think more of us may be overlooking than we should, as our freedom is at the forefront of attention worldwide. But we're facing so many different challenges. And you talk about critical issues on your podcast, US for Warriors Veterans Network. Is it us or US, I assume, for Warriors podcast?
We call it Us for Warriors, but some people say US.
Well,
Ways.
good. I like to get it right, and luckily your name's so easy, I couldn't mess that one up. But there's a lot of different issues that come up today, and utilizing the skills and knowledge that you learned specifically in the Navy are applicable in these areas. And I was curious to you how much you've expanded what you've learned from being of service into not only being an incredible author, but into the challenges that face our human resources, security, and even sales teams today.
Yeah, absolutely. What I think we're seeing across the board is that we have a great deal of stress. And this comes from geopolitical situations. It can come from worry and concern about whether or not I'm going to have a job next week. But additionally, just a lot of things in life in general and much harder work now. We've got more people doing more things with fewer people to help them. And the teeter-totter there is that when we have high stress, we wind up with lower trust and vice versa. And all the studies show that if we can get to a high trust environment, we can have 74% less stress, right? So, but we also get 4 times the productivity, according to Deloitte studies, and almost 90% more customer loyalty. So trust and stress, those two metrics should be the number one KPIs, key performance indicators in any organization, but no one measures them. And so therefore, no one addresses them. And that's one of the key things that I learned back in the military is how to deal with stress in stressful situations, especially in the Navy diver environment. Did some joint ops with SEAL Team 1. Those were the things we focused on the most to have high team functionality. How do we deal with stress properly?
And beyond the trust and the stress is also, as you know, in the polls, the Gallup polls, a huge engagement crisis in our employment force. And part of it is one that you probably are more familiar than most at Herman Science, which is, I think, counterintuitive. Being a white middle-aged male, which you may identify with in my pronouns, there's a lot to be unlearned, but there's a lot to be learned as well. I have a large organization in which I run, and as I delve deeper into the rapid adoption of Gen AI and other technologies, I started to realize that I was not getting the engagement that I wanted, not because I didn't have the trust and understand the culture, but it was just that people could get stuff done so much faster than before and so much more accurate than before, that a lot of my employees that were remote especially were just bored. They got their work done in 10 minutes. That used to take them sometimes 2 or 3 days. And you know that's possible. And I think there needs to be a movement of middle management to higher levels of executives to explore how long things take to do and reevaluate, because I think that actually is playing into the incredible percentage of people that are not engaged. And I call it Tom Brady's on the sideline syndrome. Is, having, I got a bunch of Tom Brady's that work for me, but if they're sitting on the sideline most of the day, I'm not going to win games. They got to be out on the field throwing passes and leading the troops. I was wondering what else is, posing this, 86 to 92% of employees are not fully engaged.
Yeah, I have been reading the dismal reports coming from Gallup and many others, and the numbers are creeping up higher and higher. And in fact, one I just saw the other day is that we've got a high percentage, over 50%, in fact, even as high as 70, 75% in some cases of people faking it at work. If they've been called back to the office, especially, they're just typing on a keyboard. They're actually not working. And I think the boredom you mentioned is part of that syndrome. But also, I think what's happened is that we haven't had a good leadership change. We're still working on leadership that I was trained on back in the day. Nothing wrong with Ken Blanchard and all these other leadership training courses. They're great. But we're not in the 50s and 60s anymore. We're in a different world today. And you've got to now look at it with science, behavioral science, neuroscience, whatever it is. And you must understand the profile of the people you're dealing with, the brain profile. There are different things that motivate different people. There are certain people that are the Tom Brady's, and you don't want them sitting on the sideline. There are others who are just fantastic at blocking and tackling. They're a linebacker, just put them in the right place and they're going to mow people over. And they have different work requirements than others. So we need to know who people are. This is what I wrote about in my book called Start with Who. Nothing against Simon Sinek, but start with why. But we first need to understand who before we can get to the why. Once we know who we're dealing with, then we can assign them the right tasks. We can ensure they're in the right seat, doing the right things, and we're going to have less boredom and less disengagement.
I love that. And you are no slouch as well when it comes to neuroscience, being a Harvard graduate in that subject matter expertise. And neuroscience and customization and personalization plays such an important role today because we do have the science now to determine different human beings. I always hold up this thing and say, I know that out of 8 billion or so people, I'm the only one with this. And I want to be treated that way. Obviously, we have gone down the route of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I believe diversity is by far the greatest thing that we have in a business. Inclusion is always an attitude and an activity that I believe to be part of diversity. But I will tell you, I don't agree with equity of people. I believe in equity of opportunity. I'm the only one with this. And that means I should be treated as somebody that is unique, special, a unique gift from God, and that I want to be treated with equal opportunity for me to achieve whatever it is I desire. But I want to appreciate the differences between Bill Reed and David Meltzer. I want to be able to appreciate the differences between how tall I am and how much taller most people are than me. I think that we have to change DEI to, this diversity appreciation and inclusion and leave the equity of opportunity. I was curious, with what you've learned, how do we shift this idea of everybody should be treated equally to maybe something more aligned with my beliefs? Or do you have certain ideas that may also be an improvement upon just treating everybody equal?
I completely agree with you in that respect. And I think we can look to sports teams. Our CRO, Steve Doolittle, played for the NFL for many years and have a number of other friends who played in basketball. And there are certain individuals that have certain skill sets. Some of them can shoot those three-pointers from outside. Some of them can't shoot a three-pointer, save their life, but boy, they're the best defenders on the court, right? So you are, I think, very correctly astute in that observation that certain skill sets are basically what give us the ability to be able to shine and become rock stars in the roles that we play. What are those and why are those? And again, we can now do that. One of the things we do with our clients is a rock star analysis, essentially. We did this with Better Homes and Gardens. They couldn't figure out why certain real estate agents were just blowing past their numbers and hitting home runs all the time, and others were failing within the first 18 months, costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars. We determined that there are certain key biomarkers that make for success in that particular role. And then you have some uniqueness in addition to that. So, first, do I have the right mindset for that particular job description and role? Beyond that, now I can take that and become much more, if you will, focused and have my individual capabilities. One person might have the same biometrics as another, but they're really excellent at this particular capability. Like you said, I can do this where others can't, but I first have to be able to shoot 3 points if I'm going to be the 3 point shooter. Then maybe I'm a Steph Curry, in which case I can shoot 3 points in certain rays, whereas another person can shoot 3 points from one particular part of the court, right? So that's their individual capability and trait. That's really what we do, is narrow it down to that biomarker. From there, it's up to you to figure out which part of the court you can shoot the threes from, but we can tell you which players can shoot the threes.
I love that. And, we've talked about human resources, we've talked about Gen AI, talking about sales and the specific basements and deltas determined by the desire, the basement being skills and knowledge that you can determine there at Herman Science. Desire is interesting, but one of the interesting top challenges that uh, companies face today and you help with as well, and I'm curious how, is cybersecurity. You really discuss that, and I was curious because I didn't expect to see it from the neuroscience part or HR, sales. These are very soft skills. Cybersecurity seems to be on the more concrete, quantitative side of business. What do you guys do to help with cybersecurity, or how do you see that as a top challenge?
You know, essentially what's happening today in the cybersecurity arenas is organizations have threat intelligence. They want to know where their threats are coming from, and they look at a number of different sources, and it could be coming from a number of different areas in terms of, are they getting hit with vulnerabilities? Do they have some intrusion detection, et cetera? And all that goes into a bucket. But what we now know from all the studies is that 90% of the incidents, 90% of the threats are human related. And this is coming from IBM, Gallup, Gartner, Forrester. They're all saying the same thing. And what we now know, as we mentioned earlier, is that we've got this high percentage that are disengaged. And when we're disengaged, we make 60% more mistakes. Those mistakes are, I clicked on a fish or I misused my password, right? NIH studies show two main factors cause most of the phishing clicks and security incidents. Guess what they are? Stress and trust. Okay, the two things we talked about earlier. If I
Yeah,
have high stress, I'm going to be less engaged, more disengagement, making more mistakes. And same thing with trust. If I'm in a less trusting environment, I'm not going to care as much about whether I'm not going to take the precautions that I should to not click on a fish or to not misuse generative AI, for example, and expose a bunch of stuff. So what's available now is essentially what's called user behavior analytics, but it's all been after the fact, reactive. Bob clicked on a fish. Well, that's too darn late. Okay. He's,
yeah.
the mistake's already been made. What do? Punish him, fire him, make him take more of the worthless and ineffective training? What we do is predictive behavior analytics. We can, again, with the biomarkers, look to see if we have some trust and stress issues, if we have high risk issues, and then provide the right training, coaching, and so forth to help that person become less of a security risk. And those scores can be put into your what's called risk registers for compliance and become part of your threat intelligence. If you're a CISO and you're not using human metrics as part of your threat intelligence, you're missing 90% of your risks.
Unbelievable that there's a science to the predictive measurement of people being at risk of clicking on the wrong thing, and trust as well plays into the stress that exists in all areas. To that end, what do you think causes the most stress today? And I know on your podcast, Us for Warriors, uh, you deal with a lot of people that deal with stress, but is there, a top five or a top cause of stress today in the workplace?
Yeah, and I'd go back to trust, but it's trust in relation to the leadership. And this is what's missing in current leadership training. And I actually wrote about this many years ago, a book called The Seven Secrets of Neuron Leadership. And it's essentially the inability of leaders today to understand how important it is to trust your people, hire really good people, and then trust them to do their job. Don't micromanage them. Don't require them to do things like, oh, I'm going to force you to come back to the office. Why? Because I don't trust you. Well, you've just tanked their trust and now they're not going to work for you. You can bring them back to the office, but they're going to be one of those people that are typing on their keyboard and faking it, right? Because they're forced to come back and they don't feel trusted. You've got to trust people. If you got a Tom Brady and you don't trust him, okay, come on. All right. He's
Yeah.
not going to throw very many touchdowns for you. He's going to be like, just trade me. Or I can't wait to get to another team where they actually trust me to score touchdowns. That's so critical. And that's what I think is missing with leadership. But there's also some key things that we're not doing is that understanding who we are managing. You can't treat someone who is highly creative in the same way that you treat someone who is highly technical. They have different brain sets, they communicate differently. You must understand who you're managing and how to properly engage with them. Otherwise, they're not going to perform well for you. And again, we can determine this now. It takes 7 minutes with our assessment, and you know who you're talking to and how to. We actually have communication guides to help you with that. That's a real key, I think, for leadership, and that's what's missing, and that's what's causing a lot of the problems we have in the workplace.
Well, if you want a 7-minute assessment that is scientifically proven, there's Herman Science that's there for you. The CEO, Bill Reed, an incredible podcast, Us for Warriors Veterans Network, as well as a New York Times best-selling author, known for his compelling works. Please follow him, join Herman Science, and getting the most out of the people who want the most out of what we've built. You got to know what you want, but of course, who and how will allow them to know their now and apply their why. There is a science to this stuff. I'm always following the Harvard guys of what they know to get me to where I want to be or better. It's people like Bill Reed leading the modern age day. Learn from the best, the early, I'm sure, Brian Tracy's, Bob Proctor's, Ken Blanchard's of the world, like myself, but we now have to apply that to the modern top challenges facing us today. And trust seems to be that number one thing, as always. Know your values, know your practices, know your execution model, but most importantly, know your people. CEO at Herman Science, Bill Reed. Thanks for joining me. This is David Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.